Hi everyone, Samir and Sumit here, and welcome back to our F1 podcast.
Today we'll be talking about the 2024 British Grand Prix.
Yeah, and this is definitely race of the year so far. I mean,
Hands
without a
down.
doubt, this is
Hands down,
yeah,
in most incredible race. It had a bit of everything, right? Didn't it? Like
yeah,
weather, just pure racing battles, and then like controversy, just everything. And then it
yeah,
left us really satisfied, but also a lot to think about.
yeah. Certainly now with like the break before Hungary, certainly a lot for teams to learn, for us as fans and spectators to learn, and kind of what to expect for the upcoming races. But this is definitely the best way to end the triple header.
And a long, hard-fought triple header that really turned the tide of a lot of things, not just like the
Yeah.
championship, but in terms of like the driver market and what to expect for the rest of the season.
Yeah, so going into this weekend, one of the things that we saw in this weekend was the release of the our first look at the new F1 movies that Brad Pitt is making. And after looking at it, me personally, I'm going straight to the theater as soon as it comes out.
I'm going straight to IMAX theater,
Yeah,
everything, buying everything to make sure I watch that in
yeah,
its best form because it looks pretty incredible. I
yeah.
mean, they've definitely put in a lot of work to it,
Mhm.
and I think it'll be a really good movie.
Yeah, me too. Without a doubt, it looks like it's going to be an incredible movie.
So anyway, then let's get on to the actual F1 action
Yeah.
on the track. And going into this weekend, there was a lot of talk about the weather because
Mhm.
there was a on the forecast it was predicted to rain in qualifying and in the race, and so it'd make it a really tricky, and
Yeah.
so the drivers would have to see and work with their engineers on how to compromise the setup for a wet weather race versus like dry qualifying or something like that because Park Ferme obviously you can't change the car from qualifying to the race.
Yeah.
So they would have to kind of work out the balance between that.
Yeah, another thing with rain on the track is that it creates for a lot of track evolution,
Hmm.
especially with Silverstone being used by three categories, F1, F2, and F3. There would be a lot of track evolution if it rained the previous night and all the rubber gets washed away. That could play a big impact in things like qualifying, where towards the latter end of the runs, you could see times get quicker and quicker, and that could cause some shock exits.
Yeah, we saw exactly what you said. Saw happen last year when
Mm-hmm.
we look at Sergio Perez.
Yeah.
It was raining throughout Q1, and then at the end it dried up, and Perez was the first car across the line. But like you said, there was so much track evolution that happened that by the
Yeah.
time he had the quickest lap by like 2 seconds, but then by the end he got knocked out in like P18, P15, something like that,
Yeah.
or P18, P16. And then he was out, and it was a massive blow for him.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like you said, it would make qualifying really interesting.
Yeah, so first thing we like saw throughout this FP1 was Lando Norris seemed to be the quickest guy in the dry. I mean, it was not just him, it was both McLaren's. As Oscar Piastri was up there in P3 as well, and surprisingly Lance Stroll up there for Aston Martin. I don't know where that came from, but it's just FP1 and the track needed to get rubbered in sort of, but McLaren and Lando Norris looked especially quick here. Of course, Norris would be, with the pace that he's shown throughout this season so far, he'd definitely be gunning for a pole position and certainly another race win. And another thing we noticed was Red Bull seemed to be struggling quite a bit because for some reason with this track, it didn't suit their car as much as other teams like Mercedes and Red Bull, or Mercedes and McLaren.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely did see off Austria now. There's
Mm-hmm.
the tensions obviously died down, but now Red
Yeah.
Bull are under real pressure, especially Max is under a whole lot of pressure from Lando Norris, and so Norris will be desperately trying to do his part to make sure he can win, and McLaren also need to step up in that regard too. But now like you said, there's their car. It may seem like it doesn't suit it, but I think it is partly that, but also just the fact that everyone else has probably like caught up now, or
Yeah.
almost has caught up, so they don't have that big gap anymore. Whereas last year, it was, oh, the car doesn't suit the track. This year it's, no, the car probably does suit the track, but now other teams have caught up to them, so the gap is extremely small now.
Yeah, that's a fair point to make too. I agree with that too. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Red Bull are so used to having the most dominant car now, and this is another thing that puts pressure on Sergio Perez's seat because Red Bull now need both cars scoring. Like that's without a fact. Last year they could get away with Verstappen just going and winning the races.
They did get away.
Yeah, they did get away with that. Whereas now this year they need Sergio Perez to come score big points, or else they're gonna lose out to Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris, McLaren, and even Mercedes as well.
So in FP1 also we saw a lot of rookies like Isaac Hadjar in the Red Bull. We saw Jack Doohan in the Alpine. We saw Ollie Behrman in the Haas after the big news was that he got announced as a Haas F1 driver for 2025. So good job from him. Definitely impressed in his standout performance in Saudi Arabia. So
I'm not really like too convinced yet about Oliver Behrman, whether he's going to be a good addition to the grid or not. We saw clearly there's been numerous drivers that we've seen who have just been thrown in with one stellar performance and expected to perform. We saw that with Nick DeVries, got dropped. We're seeing it with Logan Sargent too. 1 year of F2 and thrown straight into F1, and he's a talented driver, but he's just not putting in the results that Williams need, and so that's putting his seat under pressure. We've like drivers you look at like Oscar Piastri, who had that gap year to do loads and loads of F1 testing. They're now performing incredibly well in F1. That's why I think Jack Doohan would be a really good fit for F1 because he's taking a gap year too this year. He's also with the same academy that Oscar Piastri was in, but Doohan's also getting a ton of F1 car testing, multiple FP1s. So I would like to see Doohan join the grid with Alpine and Oliver Behrman. I mean, without a doubt he's a quick driver, but is he quick enough and consistent enough for F1? We'll have to see.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Obviously, it's a real shame. We've seen like what Red Bull has done before, just ruining drivers with too much pressure on them. And F1, Haas have done that. I feel like Haas did that with Mick Schumacher. I feel like Schumacher is not a bad driver. He just he was really inconsistent. Yeah, but also, I just feel like he had too much pressure on him coming straight out of F2 after like 2.5 years or something, and being in a Haas. It was I don't know, wasn't, especially in 2021 and 2022, it really wasn't a good car to show your talent, because he's an F2 champion. So and obviously Haas now have a great car, so we'll see whether he can unlock that performance that he needs for F1.
Yeah, and we also saw Franco Colapinto, the Argentine, driving for Williams in FP1 too. He's doing a pretty good job in Formula 2, and so he's up next on Williams Academy to go through to get to F1 eventually one day. But yeah, and that was pretty much the end of FP1. The major taking points away from this being that Lando Norris and McLaren look really quick in the dry, but we'll have to see. And going on into FP2, then it was more of the same. This time now it was a 1-2 from McLaren with Piastri up there in second. So again, just confirming that McLaren had the pace that they showed in FP1 and were able to bring it on into FP2 as well. So they would definitely be going into Saturday as one of the favorites for pole position.
Yeah, I mean, we also saw it wasn't plain sailing for Max Verstappen or Lando Norris as well. There were definitely a bunch of moments as they were trying to explore the track limits and everything.
Yeah.
So I mean, McLaren showing this pace now. They just need to capitalize on it, because we've seen them not capitalize in the past before, and so especially now with this race winning car, they need a race winning strategy to match that.
Yeah, and that's where the driver behind the wheel comes into question too. We've seen multiple times Max Verstappen being one of the reasons he's the great champion that he is because he knows how to make those calls under pressure. Whereas Lando Norris, we haven't really seen him deliver under pressure the starts we've seen. He's kind of messed it up. I think
all the time.
Yeah, I think Norris was one of those drivers. He thrived being the underdog when there was no pressure on him. When getting P2 was a win for him. But now that he's expected to win week in and week out, he's just not delivering what he needs to be doing.
Yeah, he's being really hard on himself, and
Yeah.
that's definitely playing a mental toll on him too. But at the same time, like, he does have a race-winning car now, so there is the expectation that he has to win, and so you have to be hard on yourself if you want to win. Like
Yeah.
we saw Max Verstappen when he got beat by Sergio Perez, twice last year. He was extremely mad and went on to win the next 17 races that year. So like,
Yeah, we've seen it with all the great champions too that have been there. We've seen that with Sebastian Vettel in Multi 21. We've seen that Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg, both of them world champions, fighting each other. We've seen that especially with Michael Schumacher. Yeah, Alonso as well. We like
Alonso.
yeah. There's like when I think Lando Norris needs to find that balance between making those big calls under pressure and not being too hard on himself because he knows he has to deliver, and on his day he is a very fast driver.
Yeah, and so continuing back to the race weekend, he clearly confirming there's serious
Yeah.
pace, and McLaren looked rapid, and Mercedes seemed to kind of fall off this session. So probably just different run plans, but it genuinely looks like now we have like a four-team battle here in Silverstone,
Yeah.
whereas Austria it was more like just McLaren and Red Bull. Here at Silverstone after FP2, because we had the two McLarens top. Perez was third. Hulkenberg with a brilliant lap to put him in P4. I don't know
Yeah.
how he did that. But then it was like Leclerc, Hamilton, Verstappen, Sainz, Stroll, Russell. So just a bunch of constructors in the top 10 right now, albeit different run plans and stuff. But
Yeah.
it was shaping up to be a good weekend all the way from the start of FP2.
Yeah, so going on into FP3, then we noticed immediately that the track was wet, so this would definitely play a big role in the times and the teams we saw towards the front, and we saw Gasly bin his Alpine in the gravel at the last chicane, so that was his session done. But Mercedes looked extremely quick in this sort of dry, not sort of dry, sort of wet, but changing conditions as well. And
Like
Red Bull kind
intermediate
of
conditions.
looked pretty bad as we've seen multiple mistakes from Verstappen and Perez losing their Red Bulls, but Mercedes came out of nowhere to look incredibly quick compared to McLaren.
Yeah, it seemed like Mercedes were thriving in these like cooler temperatures, like you
Yeah.
said, and so we just saw a lot of drivers just struggling and going off track. Gasly, like you said, extremely unfortunate because qualifying was gonna be wet. At that point, you could confirm
Yeah.
qualifying would be wet, and so Gasly having virtually no wet running would obviously hurt him. However, though it was announced then that morning that he would be taking a grid penalty that would send him to the back of the grid
Yeah.
anyway, so it didn't really matter. It would only matter for like the race, but still losing that important bit of wet running was extremely bad, especially um
Yeah.
at Silverstone where it can be wet for long periods of times. So we saw drivers just constantly going wide, just exploring the grip because
Yeah.
the track was changing all the time. It was after it dried up, it's just like you mentioned earlier, just consistently gripping up, and then they had to like find that in FP3 as well. You could also try to find that sweet zone where you could switch onto slick tires maybe, and that would
Yeah.
help you determine that in the race or something. So just a bunch of learning that they could do in FP3 because it's raining, and it was all the drivers were like on track at all times. So there was just a lot of learning going on.
Yeah, so at the end of FP3, we kind of learned that Perez was nowhere near his teammate like we've seen so far throughout this weekend. He was down there in P9, whereas Verstappen was up there in P5. So Red Bull clearly not on the pace with any of the cars, but then you have Sergio Perez who's not even on the pace of his teammate too. So we would have to see how that would play out in qualifying because, like we said at the beginning, it would be imperative for Perez to score big points this weekend if he has any chance of wanting to keep his Red Bull seat.
So just a bunch of huge learning going on in FP3. I think it was extremely crucial for what happened in the race because the drivers did a lot of exploring with the track, finding what it felt like in all these intermediate conditions, and so we saw still Mercedes emerge on top and just again confirming that four-way battle because the Mercedes were split by like a virtually nothing, and then you had Norris, Sainz, Verstappen, Leclerc, Piastri all there. So it was looking to be like a 7 car fight.
Yeah, and it would be a really cool fight for qualifying then. But going on into Q1, then we saw the tracks changing from wet at the beginning to now opening up to soft and slick conditions. But we saw with about 7.5 minutes left, Sergio Perez crash and beach his not crash but beach his Red Bull at Cops and bring out the red flag, and that was his qualifying done. And you could just see by the look on Christian Horner's face is probably what I would make. I would make the same look if I saw my driver do that.
Yeah, so this was the crossover period from the intermediate conditions, like the wet weather conditions in the beginning of Q1, and then switching over to the slick tires, and it's obviously extremely, extremely slippy at that
Yeah.
moment in time. And so, I mean, like I know it was hard conditions, but at the same time, a driver like Sergio Perez should know like how to because I don't think he was even on a hot lap. I think it might have been like
Yeah.
a cool down lap
No,
or
he was on a
something.
hot lap. Yeah, but he should still know that these high speed corners that there was 7.5 minutes left, more than enough time to go around for another lap. If you lose 5 tenths in that corner, like it's fine. Like you need the first lap needs to be just exploring the limits in these high speed
Because it's gonna
sections.
grip up
Yeah,
extremely quickly, and so just really kind of almost a
careless
rookie error,
mistake. Yeah,
careless error from Sergio Perez, and you have to feel for him there because he like already under pressure after Austria, and now under huge speculation, especially after it emerged after this race, is like release clauses that could be triggered potentially
yeah,
really soon, like summer break soon. So even after that contract extension, so um just really unlucky for Sergio Perez, but at the same time his own doing. And now
yeah,
his only saving grace would be if he could do extremely well in the race. So we'd have to see for that. So after this like incident and red flag got cleared up, the track did dry up a bit more. But then
yeah,
obviously the F1 cars running back on it in dried it up a lot quicker,
yeah.
and so we just saw times continuously flooding in. Like we saw Hulkenberg at first go to the top, and then Alonso, and then Piastri was finding pace, and then just a bunch of
Hamilton
drivers
too. Yeah,
going fast. Norris, Hamilton, just everyone. Like we saw last year, just ramping up, and like by the time like all the laps were finished, like Hulkenberg had fallen pretty far. But then the camera cut, interestingly, the camera cut to Verstappen at Kopp's corner, and Verstappen actually wasn't on the track. He was
yeah,
in the gravel, and but he kept it running. So
yeah.
I mean, obviously, it's just confirming the treacherous conditions and Perez just unlucky suffering because Verstappen made that same mistake, but he was actually able to keep it running. So
Yeah,
and he Verstappen actually got wing damage or floor damage from that. So just cops just continuously really
like catching out
slippery.
them. Yeah,
And I think Verstappen also said there was like it was still raining very lightly there too.
yeah,
So that could explain it. But unlucky for Verstappen, but like you said before, there's plenty of time. He came back into the pits.
hmm,
They fixed his car and he was out again.
yeah. And like we saw, towards the end of the session, like both Gasly and Perez down there because Perez crashed, obviously. But like we can't sleep on the fact now that Sargent has outqualified Perez once again, and actually like Sargent and Albon were going extremely well around here. I mean, Logan Sargent's no surprise. He goes really well around Silverstone with he's taken wins here in F4, F3, and F2. So he knows how to put a good lap together around here, and in what is a very big weekend for him as well. And if he wants to keep his seat with Williams for next
No,
year.
no, no. It's a big weekend because it's 4th of July week.
Oh yeah, but he was going extremely well, and that was a comfortable Q2 for Sargent. And whereas down at the bottom now, 3 spots left to go to get into Q2 because Perez and Gasly were out, but that would be Sergio Perez starting at the very back of the grid, and not what Red Bull would want with the incredible fight at the front.
Yeah, so we just saw a bunch of more times coming through at the end. Like
Yeah,
we saw a bunch of drivers like Ricardo improved to P7, Verstappen went to P8. Leclerc made it up to P3. The Mercedes finished their laps as first and second, and Ferraris
Yeah.
finished third and fourth. Sonoda went up to P6 at the end, and so just unlucky for Bottas, Magnussen, and Ocon, because ultimately, let's be honest, in these conditions, ultimately those three drivers were just the unlucky ones because
Yeah.
all of them in like these changing conditions had the pace. It was just track location. Whoever was at the front of the queue or whoever was the like first ones to take the checkered flag were the ones that were gonna suffer the most, like we saw
Yeah, but I
Perez
mean,
last year.
I wouldn't really call that unlucky because it's planned. Each team plans out when they're gonna go out on track. So
But
if
then you
they want
have
to go
like
out early, then that's on them.
some
So
drivers like to overtake though. Like we saw
yeah,
like Hungary 2023 drivers like to overtake each other. But in the end it didn't change the fact that we had both the Alpines out. Sergio Perez disastrous qualifying.
hmm
Kevin Magnussen, who wouldn't be happy with that at all considering the pace Hulkenberg has shown, and then Valtteri Bottas out qualified by Zhou Guanyu.
yeah. So going on into now the Q2 and the final set of runs, as it stood, the RBs, the Sauber of Zhou Guanyu, and surprisingly the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc, as well as Lance Stroll, were the drivers at risk. But Leclerc was on a pretty good lap, and he was looking to improve his time. He went up only into seventh, so it wasn't a pretty stellar lap from Leclerc. Sainz went up to P5, so now Leclerc was under even more pressure from the drivers behind because you had people like Verstappen who was now in the drop zone. He was improving his lap time. Sonoda couldn't manage to get out of Q2, so that was his qualifying done. But Verstappen went up into P6, so Leclerc went up now into P10. Sargent couldn't improve his lap, so unfortunately it would be P11 for him currently as it stood. But Stroll was currently improving his lap times as well. But as he took the checkered flag, he went up into P10. And so that was just enough for him to go through into Q3. And that was Charles Leclerc's qualifying done and over. And that was like an incredible bottle job from him and Ferrari now. So in what is this incredibly tight battle at the front now, we've seen two drivers get caught out. Sergio Perez for Red Bull and now Charles Leclerc for Ferrari. And yeah, I think Leclerc might have used up all his luck in Monaco.
Yeah, I saw this comment. It was like Leclerc used up 10 years of his luck just to win Monaco this
Yeah.
year. I mean, he's been extremely unlucky, and right now, like, it's definitely looking like I mean, you can obviously raise questions like why did Ferrari choose him over Sainz with these kind of performances?
Yeah.
But I think genuinely Leclerc is struggling with his car this weekend, and just another like strategy mistake as well with their
hmm
track location and things like that, because another strategy mess up we saw was that RB with Ricardo. If you notice, his time was like
A
seven
second
tenths
off. Yeah.
and 7 tenths slower than his teammate, but
hmm
that's because RB put him out on the track like in really bad traffic, so Ricardo got huge amounts of traffic in
Yeah.
the first sector that lost him all that time. And so Ricardo said after the race he needs to talk with the team because he didn't understand it, and Leclerc said similar things too. So
Yeah.
just really more communication is needed for like Leclerc, Ricardo, and a bunch of other things, because now like in these conditions as well, even though it's like really dry, now the margins are so thin that everything has to be extremely 100% clear between both parties. Otherwise, things like this will happen, which will definitely cost you.
Yeah, and as it stood right now, Mercedes seemed to look like the quickest cars out there in the dry. At least with both of their drivers up there, so it was going to be a really intense and tight battle for Q3. And going on into Q3, and the at the end of the first set of runs, George Russell pipped his good friend Lando Norris just by 6/1000ths of a second. So Russell was currently on provisional pole. It was Mercedes, McLaren, the top four, with Verstappen clearly down on both McLarens and both Mercedes.
And Hulkenberg was right there with
Yeah,
Verstappen as well too. So Hulkenberg quietly performing after his P6 in Austria. Could we
yeah,
see another spectacular finish in similar fashion in Silverstone? Because Hulkenberg's been going great. Obviously, he
yeah,
goes great around this track like we saw in the 70th anniversary race in 2020. He qualified P3 here after being a
yeah.
substitute. So Hulkenberg definitely knows what he's doing around here. So it would be
Yeah.
interesting to see come the end of qualifying.
Yeah, so going on into the final set of runs now, Stroll and Albon in eighth and ninth respectively couldn't improve their times, but we just saw Hulkenberg blitz the final sector and stay where he was at P5. As Verstappen crossed the line, he went up into P4 ahead of Piastri and Hulkenberg, but there was a load of drivers improving behind. But Lando Norris couldn't seem to improve his time as he aborted his lap and went into the pit lane, so he knew he messed up. But the two Mercedes were flying, and it was Hamilton who actually went onto provisional pole by just 3/100ths of a second ahead of his teammate. But Russell was going extremely well through the middle sector, and eventually he was able to beat his teammate Lewis Hamilton by a tenth of a second. So it was actually a really strong lap time from George Russell, and that would seal him pole position in front of his home crowd, and a really good lap time to go a tenth and a half, more than a tenth and a half clear of his teammate.
Yeah, so it seems like Mercedes was just able to fire their tires better in these cooler conditions. And
Yeah,
so, like we saw in FP2, Mercedes liking the cooler conditions, which would help them at the start of the race as well.
yeah.
And so,
And George Russell obviously flying with confidence too after his win in Austria and now pole position here. He would definitely be gunning for that win tomorrow.
so they were able to heat their tires more and get better grip. And we saw Verstappen, even with that floor damage, still just, I mean, showing why he's class of the field at the moment. Because in that
Yeah,
car, which let's be honest, like Perez would have not made it that high with
yeah.
that floor damage. Unfortunately for Perez, Verstappen just showing extremely well. P4 with all that floor damage, and then
hmm
McLaren just not able to fire their tires up as well as the Mercedes, because Norris was P3 and Piastri was P4. Hulkenberg, on the other hand, was another incredible lap to start P6,
Yeah.
extremely high. That might be Haas's highest start of the year, but
Yeah, of the year, not of all time, because Magnussen's pole in Brazil.
yeah. So really strong lap from him, and Sainz and Ferrari will be hugely disappointed because
Yeah.
Sainz was just seventh, and it looked like what looked promising for them after the slight margins. Just Ferrari ended up getting it all wrong, and their car just completely not suiting these Silverstone conditions. Then came Stroll, Albon, and Alonso. So Stroll was ahead of Alonso actually, which was
Yeah.
really surprising. I saw a comment: Alonso's downfall needs to be studied.
Yeah, Aston Martin's downfall needs to be studied though, but they seem to go well around this track. Of course, it's also their home race. And speaking of British too, it was an all British front three at the British Grand Prix with Russell, Hamilton, and Norris. So it would be cool to see if emotions could play into the fight for a win. Whether we would have a three-way fight for the win tomorrow, whether we would have wheel to wheels or crashing, we would have to see.
Yeah, and I mean at the moment it looked like Mercedes definitely have the edge because
Yeah.
they just look hands down the fastest car on pure pace here.
Yeah, and they also have like two the experienced driver in Lewis Hamilton who can make those race winning calls. They have George Russell who knows how to he also is a driver who's known for thinking about the strategy too, and he's not afraid to question his team when they make a questionable decision. So we have two drivers who can make decisions that can win them the races, unlike Lando Norris that we've seen so far.
So we have to see all that. Obviously, it's just all
hmm
talk until the lights go out. So as the lights came on, it was really exciting to see. Obviously, this year there were no Apex GP cars at the back of the grid, so they could
Yeah.
show the whole grid this year. And so the lights came on, and then the lights went off, and it was a good start from George Russell, and Hamilton immediately just had to go behind George
Yeah.
Russell. So Russell definitely heated his tires up better, and the two Mercedes were leading. Verstappen was already trying to look down the inside at Lando Norris, and by the time he got to the loop and Aintree, Verstappen was able to go round the outside of Lando Norris. So another
Yeah.
poor start from the British McLaren driver, and Verstappen was
hmm
already on the back of Lewis Hamilton down the Wellington Straight. And
Yeah.
further back, we saw Charles Leclerc have a really good first couple of corners as he was flying
hmm
up. I think that was him flying up. Yeah, it was because he was already just two places behind his
Yeah.
teammate. And so it was a really good couple of corners for the opening top two. However, it was not a good couple of corners for Alexander Albon as
Yeah.
he just went right into the back of Fernando Alonso, or Alonso came across him and Albon had nowhere to go. And then it seemed like he got sideswiped by his teammate as well,
Yeah.
who Logan Sargent had a really good start. And then I don't think anyone actually saw this, but I feel like I was the only one that noticed it because I'm religiously watching Ricardo during the races. But it looked like Albon got another hit as he went onto the loop by Ricardo's front wing,
Yeah.
and so just Albon 3 points of contact within the opening like three corners, so not at all the start that Alex Albon would have wanted.
Yeah, but a good, great start from Max Verstappen, who wasted no time at all and set his eyes immediately on the Mercedes, both of them in front of him. But going on to lap 9, it was George Russell comfortably leading from his teammate Lewis Hamilton, who was comfortably ahead of Verstappen. So at this point in the race, the Mercedes were just managing their tires a little bit and trying to open the gap between the Red Bull of Verstappen. But that's when we've got our first message from Ferrari saying that rain was expected on the way. So this is where the pit walls would be looking at the radar constantly. The drivers would have to constantly be monitoring the track conditions and making those calls about whether it's the right time to go on to the intermediate tires. And also another thing we noticed was that this the first batch of rain was going to be quite a small batch. So at the quicker strategy would be just for the drivers to survive out on track and to not bin it and to just manage that gap until the rain stopped. And then when the next set of rain came, which would be a longer period, they go on to the intermediate tires then and then switch back to dries when it dries out at the end.
Yeah, so that's why, like you said, we saw drivers just managing for these first
Yeah.
like 15, 20 laps. They didn't want to take too much wear out of their tires so they would still
Yeah.
have enough grip when the rain came around. However, that didn't mean necessarily just hold position because obviously these drivers are world class, so they know how to manage tires while overtaking.
Yeah.
And so it just continuously like taking as little wear out of your tire as possible while still keeping your minimum speeds up.
Yeah.
It really hard to do, but these drivers make it look like second nature. And so we saw Leclerc. He was the first one to kind of make an overtake on that strategy, and he seemed to be just struggling behind Lance Stroll. Like Stroll had also a really good start, and Leclerc was just stuck behind him for like
Yeah.
5-6 laps, and
Yeah,
he
a
was
long,
just it
long
was
time.
really really weird to see because like Leclerc obviously you'd think in the Ferrari he'd just be able to fly by Stroll, but only on lap 13 was he able to make the move to the inside of like Stowe, I think is that corner. And so yeah, Stowe, and so finally Leclerc was able to get in some clean air.
Yeah.
And so really unusual to see. Just I think that for me, that at least that just confirmed, okay, it was going to be a rough race for Ferrari. They'd be lucky to score any points. That was my thinking. But going on to lap 15 then, Max Verstappen, after you said he was straight onto the back of the Mercedes, had actually fallen off them, and I thought he was just tire managing.
Yeah.
But it seemed like he was just genuinely struggling for pace.
Yeah, Norris was able to easily get past into Stowe with DRS, and clearly now Norris was past the tire management phase, and it was all attack for him as he now set his sights on the Mercedes. And going on to lap 17 now, Verstappen was definitely struggling because the second McLaren of Oscar Piastri was able to get past into Stowe, and it was at this point in the race that the rain was starting to arrive. We saw at Stowe it was starting to drizzle a little bit, and that made the track extremely slippery. So for a young driver like Oscar Piastri, that was a really good move to keep his car under control and keep it on the track and make that clean pass with no contact at all.
So at this point, the McLarens had comfortably fired their tires on, and
Yeah.
thankfully they fired them what seemed to be pretty late, because considering Mercedes had theirs like heated up and gripped up right at the start,
Yeah.
McLaren got them in the working window just in time before the rain came, so they would have nice hot tires to navigate the slippy track. But then going on to lap 18, we saw George Russell, who had like a comfortable like second and a half lead
gap, yeah.
to Lewis Hamilton. Russell, obviously the less experienced driver, was struggling in these rainy conditions. Lewis Hamilton obviously knows how to win in rain conditions here. after that incredible 2008 performance, lapping the
Yeah,
entire field except like second or third place. He finished with a gap to second place of 1 minute and 8 seconds.
yeah,
Like
that
just to
was
second place, like average times, a minute and a minute and 8 seconds gap would be like to P15 or something in
yeah.
today. So Hamilton obviously definitely knows what he's doing around here, and he was able to just confirm that even still with all the controversy around him right now of is he past his prime. Hamilton made that move into Stowe corner like he did in 2008, and Hamilton took the lead of the British Grand Prix. And in these conditions, on these slippy conditions, he looked like he was the faster Mercedes, whereas it has normally looked like it was George Russell. Now Hamilton took the lead, but then on lap 19, both of them went off. So it
Yeah.
was like it was definitely starting to chuck it down. And now Lando Norris was getting in on the mix too, and Oscar Piastri soon to be. So now just everything was kicking off here.
Yeah, and we saw Norris immediately get past George Russell onto the Wellington straight now. So Russell definitely struggling, and McLaren just looked like they were able to keep more temperature in their tires compared to the Mercedes because they seem to have so much more grip compared to the Mercedes. And at the end of lap 19, Norris was all over the back of Lewis Hamilton, and he was looking to get the lead into turn one. And Russell and Norris was able to go down the inside of Hamilton at turn one and take the lead. And now it was Hamilton who seemed to be struggling as he was under pressure from his teammate George Russell, and Piastri was now quickly closing up. And this is such a good thing for McLaren to have both of their cars right there, something Red Bull aren't experiencing right now. But when you have both cars up there, that's really good for your strategist, and they would love that because now they can double attack or double defend or have one driver defend. In this case, that would be Oscar Piastri. But Piastri now, in the terms for the Constructors' Championship now, was this would be looking incredibly good for McLaren, and Piastri would now be all over Lewis Hamilton going on into lap 20, and Hamilton seemed to run wide at the exit, Magus and Beckett, and Piastri was all over the back of Lewis Hamilton and was kind of pushed onto the grass as well. But it was another calm and collected move from Oscar Piastri, and I've been really impressed with him so far. How he's been able to make such clean overtakes, and like while being so young and kind of inexperienced, he's still able to make some incredible overtakes, and he's definitely not afraid to back out of a fight.
Yeah, so McLaren now had a 1-2, and that was really
Hmm.
great for them. And both of them looked just as fast as the other. And so McLaren looked like they were now the team to beat. And the race just completely flipped its head in just 20 laps. And so McLaren looked like they had more tire temperature, more confidence in their medium tires. And the Mercedes now looked like they were struggling. And like they looked like they lost all their heat in their tires now. And like you said, Oscar Piastri driving really well. He was right there, just following Lando Norris through, making some incredible overtakes. And so I think now on lap 28, Max Verstappen decided, or lap 27, Max Verstappen decided to come into the pits for the intermediate tires. And so this was the phase now where the second part of rain was coming
Yeah,
in, and drivers had to pit now because the rain was coming for a long time. So
yeah.
lap 28 and lap 27, everyone just came into the pits. However, I think we actually skipped over the part that on the first part of rain and like lap 20, we saw Charles Leclerc and Sergio Perez make
Oh
the
yeah,
decision to come into the pits. And boy, oh boy, was it the wrong decision.
yeah.
And
Terrible decision.
because it was way too dry yet. That's why like the strategists were correct in that it would only be like for a little bit, so it just stayed way too dry, and so the intermediate tires were just burning up alive, just sliding all over the place, and so
Yeah.
it effectively just threw away Sergio Perez and Charles Leclerc's races, and so just no points again would be really tough for them in both drivers and constructors championships, and it would leave them, especially Sergio Perez, with a lot of discussion about his future, because in that RB20 you just have to be scoring points, and for a driver like Sergio Perez with 10 plus years in the sport, like you would expect him to know when to switch on to the right tire.
Yeah, and yeah, because you can't really keep blaming the team too much. Yes, the team should be at fault for some of it, but at the end of the day, it's the driver who's the one making the movements and choosing to come into the pit lane. So the driver should know better too about whether the track is dry enough, or he should be asking questions like how long is this rain gonna start, how long is this rain gonna continue for? Are there any drivers that have gone onto the intermediate tires? But it's just a poor decision from both of them, the driver and the team. But going on into lap 29, then the leaders finally came into the pits, and we saw a pretty controversial decision at McLaren. We saw Lando Norris box to go onto the intermediates, and Piastri stayed out. This was lap 28. Piastri stayed out because McLaren didn't want to go and risk that double stack. And we saw Mercedes, though, they decided to go a double stack, and Piastri was just left out there on a wet track. And by the time Piastri was down the hanger straight, Norris had already closed up to about 5 seconds behind his teammate. So this was just really bad for Oscar Piastri, and this kind of just threw his race away. And now at this point, Lando Norris was comfortably leading the race, and Piastri had a lot of work to do ahead of him.
Yeah, he almost like lost a full second to his teammate there, and I don't know what math they were doing on the McLaren pit wall, because they thought that this wouldn't make them lose as much time as a double stack, which was definitely not the case. I think even if you factor in like having to get two sets of tires out of the garage and waiting for them, I think it still would have been the much better decision to pit them on the same lap. And this was just clearly just ruining Oscar Piastri's race. And poor guy, he was driving so well, arguably just as well, maybe in some cases better than Lando Norris. And so just to have it all thrown away, we definitely have to see whether he could catch back up. But it was definitely like McLaren have a race-winning car, but they don't have a race-winning strategy to match it right now.
Yeah, and going on into lap 34, George Russell, unfortunately, is so gutting for him. He had to retire from his home race due to a suspected water issue or something like that. But he was driving he was driving an incredible race, and for him to have it all thrown away and having to retire with that was so disappointing for him, because he definitely could have won this race too.
And so just unfortunate for George Russell. Obviously, it came as a sudden shock, because like once hydraulics are gone, that's not like a thing you can nurse home. You just have to retire immediately, because hydraulics power everything, like the brakes, the steering, and cooling and everything. And so just really such a shame for Russell, who's been driving really well these past couple of weekends. But now going on to lap 39, now the rain had finally like subdued and the track was drying up, and this was the time to switch onto the slick tires. And so Lewis Hamilton only had a set of new soft tires he could put on. So Hamilton would have to nurse those home for the next 12 laps, and that's all that Mercedes could do. So they had no choice. That was the right call they had to make.
Verstappen followed him in too, so it was a good decision from Verstappen to follow in Lewis Hamilton, whether he made that call himself or whether he did it because Hamilton was pitting as well. Whoever made that call, it was a really good call. And even with Lewis Hamilton too, it lap 39 was the lap to come and pit.
Yeah, it was Verstappen that made that call.
Yeah.
And McLaren on the other hand though, they waited an extra lap, and it was really, really weird and really annoying to hear.
Almost
on the
stupid,
radio. Because like I said before, they have the race winning car, but they didn't have the race winning strategy to match it, because they were just talking with their driver the whole time. They were talking with Lando Norris the whole time about, so we have a soft tire that we could cover Hamilton with, or we have a medium tire that we could cover Verstappen with. And everyone in the F1 paddock, everyone in the F1 world watching, we all know that the medium tires were the way to go, because the soft would degrade.
There's 12 laps left. The soft tires are clearly gonna die out by then. You're the only driver in the top 5 to have a new set. Well, you and your teammate are the only drivers in the top 5 to have a new set of medium tires. Why would you not take those tires, put them on, and go all the way?
Because the medium tires proven throughout this race weekend, they were a faster and better race tire to use than the soft tires. Because the hard tires in this instance would have been too slippy for them. Like Verstappen, he was obviously able to manage them way better because the Red Bull had a different amount of tire wear than the McLaren or the Mercedes. But and I think also Verstappen didn't have a medium tire anyway to use. So the fact that Lando Norris then he also couldn't make the decision as well. Obviously he's now obviously relatively inexperienced, but still now he has a lot more
And he's got 5 years
experience.
in the sport. I think he should know how to make these calls. Russia, we could
He
forgive
should,
him for
yeah.
that, but at this point, he should know to make these calls and what tire to go on. He was given the information of who's in front of him. Certainly knows how many laps are left.
But I think McLaren said soft to cover Hamilton and medium to cover Verstappen and Norris. This was like he said the same thing in Barcelona. I think like he wanted the tire that would help him win, but in this case, McLaren also fed him the wrong information. Like yeah, he should have known. Maybe you could say he should have known that from like the tire where he testing he did in practice. Also, McLaren just didn't have the data properly given to him, and so whatever the reasons were, just miscommunication again, and another bottle job by McLaren for just wrong information. And so Lando Norris exited the pit lane on the soft tire, and he came up behind Lewis Hamilton. And Norris also ended up making a mistake. He went
Yeah,
too deep on his pit box, and that cost him like a
yeah.
second or two in his pit box. And so Norris again, his soft tires were just degrading really fast. By lap 48, they already were gone, and Verstappen was able to just close up right to him and breeze past him. And now it'd be a dogfight to see whether Verstappen would be able to catch up to Hamilton, or would
Yeah.
Hamilton have this one in the bag.
Yeah, going on into the final lap, then lap 52, it looked like Hamilton had held on all the way through, and the crowd rose for Lewis Hamilton for the ninth time at Silverstone, and for the first time since Saudi Arabia in 2021, Lewis Hamilton won a Grand Prix, and he won the British Grand Prix in front of his home crowd, and it was such a cool win to see, such a great win for him and the team. Mercedes now made it back-to-back wins for the first time, I think, since 2021.
Yeah,
So
probably.
it was incredible for them, their momentum as a team. Max Verstappen had an incredible job, and that was a drive of a champion from Verstappen
Yeah.
to make those right calls, to get up into P2, and to extend his lead in the championship over Lando Norris, who's going to come home for P3 and make it back-to-back podiums at Silverstone. But he was definitely not pleased with that. And I want to give credit to Logan Sargent. He didn't score points, but he finished in P11 after making some really good overtakes, being kind of near his teammate. Of course, Albon scored points for Williams, which was really good for them. But Sargent finishing P11 for his best result of the year was a really good show for himself and to prove to Williams kind of as well. But it was
Yeah.
Piastri who would have felt definitely that he was robbed of the win, who came home in P4 with the fastest lap on the medium tires. So the medium tires clearly were the best tires to go to if you had Piastri setting the fastest lap of the race with his brand new set of medium tires. So that'll just be further insult to injury for Lando Norris.
I just can't believe McLaren bottled it with two cars.
Yeah,
Like you talked about, Red Bull don't have that luxury to have two cars up there. McLaren do, and yet they found a way to throw it away.
yeah,
But just obviously more learning McLaren need to do, and there needs to be some deep investigations into that. Piastri you can definitely forgive. Norris also, he's Norris visibly upset about this result. You could see it, and I just can't imagine how Oscar Piastri would be feeling. But this race, you can argue about all the Hamilton Verstappen rivalry, all that stuff. But this race definitely showed why both of them are world champions and why both of them
yeah.
are the best in F1. And so they made the calls at the right time, and they had more pace than everyone else. But in this case, Mercedes definitely had the edge on Red Bull this weekend,
Yeah.
and so Hamilton definitely 110% deserved that win. So it was a really great win and a really great race weekend.
Yeah, and to finish off the points, then Sainz P5 for Ferrari, Hulkenberg back-to-back P6s for Haas, and incredible points for them in the battle at the bottom for the Constructors' Championship. Aston Martin scored double points with Stroll ahead of Alonso, Albon taking 2 points for Williams, and then Yuki Tsunoda rounding off P10 with 1 point for RB, and Carlos Sainz at the end took the fastest lap on the final lap. But it was a really good weekend of Formula One racing.
Yeah, so definitely Hamilton, Verstappen, definitely the big winners. Hulkenberg, the big winners this weekend, and then the losers this weekend. Definitely the two McLarens, and then Charles Leclerc and Sergio Perez, obviously.
Yeah,
And boy, oh boy, are the Sergio Perez rumors really rampant now after dismal weekend for him. He
yeah.
needs to bounce back in Hungary and Belgium, if otherwise some serious things could happen to him. And Red Bull right now are being let off the hook by the fact that McLaren can't get their stuff together.
Yeah.
Mercedes are definitely on the uprise, so I think it's going to be a really interesting second half of the season.
Yeah, if this weekend was anything to go by, it's that we're in for an incredible end to the season and the second half of the season. But that's all for this episode and the British Grand Prix. Thank you for listening, and be sure to join us next time as we take a look at the 2024 Hungarian Grand Prix. Thank you.